There we go. We are live yet again on our journey through some patristic theology leading up to Christmas. And so just want to welcome everybody on to the live stream. And let's see. I'm just going to take a second and share the video to the various different places so people know that we're live. So you just give me just a second and we will get all that taken care of. Here we go. So, welcome everybody to another day of the contemplative journey into patristic theology, contemplative journey into the incarnation, and we're looking at the church fathers and specifically what they thought when it came to the incarnation of Christ. And great to see you, Jim. So if you're just jumping on, please give the video a like. If you're on Facebook, a share, subscribe to the channel on YouTube. All that stuff would be greatly helpful, and especially if you share the video on either platform, whatever, lets people know that we're live. And yeah, so what are we doing? Well, in leading up to Christmas, last year I wrote a 10-day devotional contemplative journey, which is what we've been going through. This little booklet right here, we used it in our church last year, helping to look at and appreciate the richness that's in the church fathers as it pertains to the incarnation. Good morning, Sarah. Great to see you. It's actually just afternoon for me, so I can say good afternoon. If you're further west, back west, then it's all morning for you. So I wrote this last year, trying to help people appreciate what the ramifications of the incarnation are on uh, on our humanity. And oftentimes in evangelical circles, and especially in the charismatic circles, we're intensely focused upon the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, which is good. Like we should be focused on those things, um, but we don't appreciate the ramifications of the virgin birth. And so, as I've said a number of times, that when we think about the virgin birth, our perspective is he was born without sin. And so that's the um, that's the reason for the virgin birth. But as we saw in previous days, when we look at patristic theology, the reason he was born without sin was not so much that he would be the perfect sacrifice. The reason he was born without sin is because he was united, human and divine, united in one um, hypostasis. That's where we get the term hypostatic union, one being, two natures, one being. They were perfectly united. And so he was born without sin because he had a nature that had no capacity for sin, that sin had never conquered or touched. And so in the weddedness of that union, human and divine, humanity is now picked up on those properties, if we were to speak that way. And so the story of redemption, transformation, sanctification, all of these big Christian words that we use, actually begins in terms of the person of Christ, begins in the womb of Mary. And this is where, you have arguments within the context of the early church going, well, can we talk about God as being a baby in a womb? Well, that would diminish his godness, his divinity. So no, we can't talk about that. That's sacrilegious. And then you have other guys going, we absolutely can talk about that because he took on all that it meant to be a human. And so we have to talk that way. Actually, it's vital to our conversation that we talk that way, that God dwelt in the womb of a woman. And if we can't talk that way, then we've actually robbed the redemption story and the narrative of part of its deep impact upon what it means to be human. And we've talked about how just the fact of the incarnation is a ringing endorsement of humanity. We looked at that it was out of the great pleasure and affection that the Father has for humanity that his Son came. And so the incarnation is actually a result of his desire for humanity. And so it's this ringing endorsement of what it means to be human. And we often wrestle with our humanness and want to forego our humanness to be fully spiritual, which really isn't a biblical narrative at all, that God longs to take humanity and restore humanity to the original vision that he has for humanity. And you can see it in this. By the way, good morning, Lorraine. Good to see you as well. And getting to that thought in a second, that God had an original vision for humanity. And just want to let you know, share the video. It's great to see everybody on. We're going through patristic theology and as it pertains to the incarnation, leading up to the obviously leading up to Christmas, because that's the season that we're in. Great to see Deanna jumping on. Love seeing it, guys. So God had an original vision for humanity, because it says, let us make man in our image. Okay, so to have an image means you have to consider something. Okay, to have an image in mind. So I've got back here, right? Here is a classic recreation of a Lego spaceship. I don't know if you guys ever noticed that. It's one of my favorite things on my bookshelf. The kids and I built that after Christmas last year, and we keep it here in the office. And then when they're in the office, they play with it. So that's one of the classic designs of a Lego spaceship. So for me to think of building that spaceship, right? I see an image of it, I see the instructions to build it, and I envision it, right? Let us make a spaceship in this image. So I have to have an image and a plan to get there. So when God says, let us make man in our image, he's got an image that he's considering that man would become. And actually the term and this is germane to everything that we're saying. Yeah, Sarah misses the spaceship because of, here, let's do this. I will pull it off and give you guys an up close. This thing's amazing, by the way. So there you go, Sarah. You can see you can see it even opens up in the back. Look at that. And there's a little vehicle in the back. So the kids, when they're here, they play with this thing. And I'm not going to tell you whether or not I play with it, but there it is. So hey, you're busy looking at the books and I'm looking at the Legos. Anyway, we love playing on the plane of our kids. So what's one of our core family values is we call it floor time. It's just getting on their level and playing with them. That's because, if I try and have them play on my level, they'll be, maybe it's a board game or a game of sports or something. They can't play on my level, but I can play on their level, and as they develop and grow. So it's a core value of our family is that we play on their level. So we build Legos with them, and the kids really, really like that. So they constantly ask me to build stuff with them. Okay, so God had an original intention for you, which is evident in the statement that he makes in Genesis 1, let us make man in our image, meaning that he envisioned something, right? He had an image that he was considering making man in. And the word for make in the original language, but whether it's in the Greek in the Septuagint or it's in the Hebrew in the Masoretic texts, it's the Masoretic text. Anyway, whether it's in the Greek or the Hebrew, the word for let us make man in our image is the word to establish a project with an end goal in mind. It's how you might say, I'm going to make a piece of art. So you start with a canvas, the paint, the paintbrushes, you have a picture that you're going to do. And over time, through the strokes on the brush and all of that, you eventually have a finished piece of art. So when he said, let us make man in our image, he's saying, let us initiate a project with an end goal in mind. That's what he's saying. So the human end goal is Jesus. That's the end goal. That's the projects. That's why he's the final Adam. He's the perfect man. He is the end goal of the project. So he initiates a project in Genesis 1. He completes a project in the person of Jesus, in the incarnation. So when we look at the person of Jesus, we look at the whole thing. We don't just look at little bits. There's been people who have said, and I think rightly, that if you took out the virgin birth and the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, lots of evangelicals would have nothing more to say about the person of Jesus. They would just look at him as a good teacher, as opposed to it's actually the whole story. And it is the whole story. So we're just focusing in on the incarnation. But when you actually look at the life of Jesus, there's so many things that he does in his life that mimics what happened in the Old Testament to the nation of Israel. As he's embodying the story of humanity and embodying it, he's redeeming it. So, for instance, when Jesus gives the Sermon on the Mount, which is typically looked at as his kingdom vision for what life looks like, it says that he went up on a mountain and sat down, right? And then he gives the kingdom vision. Blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the meek, goes through the whole thing, right? Blessed are those who grieve. So the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, goes up on a mountain and gives the talk. And so we look at that through the same lens of the law being handed to Moses. Moses goes up on a mountain and receives the law directly from God. So Jesus lays out his quote unquote law, which is the Sermon on the Mount, and he even reinterprets the law, right? He goes, you've heard it said, thou shalt not murder, which is one of the 10 commandments that was given to Moses on the mountain. And I say this, don't even harbor hatred in your heart, is essentially what he's saying. So we see that the whole life of Jesus is the redemptive narrative of humanity. So the giving of the law happens in Exodus. Moses goes up to the mountain, receives the 10 commandments. The giving of the new covenant in Jesus happens. He goes up on a mountain and he gives this great teaching. So we see it, and there's multiple moments like that throughout the whole gospel narrative. So the whole life of Jesus is actually important for us to look at. And so when we look at the incarnation is the means through which redemption happens. It's the inaugural moment. So it's really important that we look at that. So we're on day 5 of the contemplative journey into the church fathers. And again, the PDF for this is available in the description of the video. You can download it and follow along with it. You can do it at your own pace. You can download it and forget about it if you want. We'd hope that maybe it would be a little more impactful than that. But it's got thoughts from 2 of the later patristic authors when we're reaching the end of the early church age, in Leo the Great and Maximus the Confessor, who kind of represent to me a culmination of the different arguments that were going on, or really arguments, but the narrowing down and codifying the language that we can use when we talk about Jesus. Maximus and Leo. Leo was a pope, and Maximus the Confessor. Someone's called a confessor because they suffered loss of. There was some kind of suffering that happened to them because they were confessing Christ. And for Maximus, he had his hand cut off and his tongue cut out because he was considered a heretic. And then they basically decided that Maximus was right, but it was a little bit late for that. So poor Maximus. And so Leo and Maximus are 2 heavyweights when it comes to theological insights from church history, and especially when it comes to understanding the nature of Jesus. So you can get this there. And we've said, any donation that comes in, we're happy to send you free of charge. This is our gift while our supplies last, the 10 days with the church fathers. A few of you have done that. So there's a link to donate within the description of the episode, and receive a free booklet. We also have just put out a couple new resources, which I'll talk about near the end of our live stream. So day 5 is a Maximus the Confessor quote. And, you got it right here. If you can see day 5. Says this: Christ, this is our topic. And it's really building off of what we talked about yesterday. So you can go back and look at the live stream from yesterday, which was our longest one. I don't think this one will be as long, but we'll see. Christ was in no way less than God when he assumed human flesh. So we're building off of that. Maximus Confessor says this: "For in becoming man, he was not subjugated to human nature." So, we went through that yesterday, that his humanity didn't in no way robbed him of his divinity or diminished his divinity. We see him exercising his divine privileges and his divine power throughout the Gospels. We see Jesus doing that as a man. And we see the people, I mentioned yesterday when Jesus speaks to the wind and the waves, and they immediately come to rest because they recognize his voice, that the very next thing that happens is the disciples marvel at what manner of man he is, which should tell you something, because they've got language to describe someone who prays um, and weather changes, right? You can look at Moses, you can look at Elijah, you can look at a number of these figures that prayed and weather patterns changed. They have language for it. So when they marvel and they have no language to describe who he is, they're going, this is something more than just a simple prophet in front of us. And so they're recognizing the nature of the divine right within the human. Okay. So we talked about that. So Maximus, for in becoming man, he was not subjugated to human nature, but on the contrary, he elevated nature to himself. On the contrary, he elevated nature to himself. And this is the crux of the incarnation when it comes to the patristics, is he didn't his humanity wasn't diminished, his divinity wasn't diminished, his divinity wasn't elaborated on, and his humanity wasn't elaborated on. The purpose of the incarnation was to take what was his and unite it to what is ours. So when we think about this, when we think and we'd make up these constructs that say, Jesus didn't exercise his divine privileges, or he emptied himself of his divinity. Looking at Philippians 2, um, what we do is we're actually misappropriating the reason for the incarnation, because the reason for the incarnation was not so much that he was just a sinless sacrifice. That was part of the incarnation. The reason for the incarnation is that mankind would become one with God yet again. And the culmination of the project from Genesis 1 would find its fulfillment in Jesus, and then it would be inaugurated forward in the church and in the everyday life of the Christian. It's actually been said that in the first 5 to 600 years of church history, you don't find people becoming Christians because they said a prayer. You find people becoming Christians because they encountered Christ. And it's not until you get further along that the mindset comes in, and this is part of the expansion into Europe, the missionary expansion into Europe that happened, where uh, the means through which Europe was Christianized was to send a priest to walk with a king and to Christianize the king, and then the king would put out an edict that Christianized the people, and you essentially had um, small kingdoms that were Christianized all throughout Europe because priests walked with a king. So then the people become Christians in name only. They're Christians because the king has become a Christian. And so now the practices are reformed, but they're not Christians because they encountered Jesus. So, and there's lots of different reasons for that happening, but that's one of them. So people became Christian in the first 5 or 600 years at a grassroots level because they encountered Jesus. And you find story after story after story of that. So they encounter something and everything begins to change in them. Why? Not simply because they're forgiven through the cross, though there is that, but because they've all of a sudden become united with something that their heart is desperately longed for, that they recognize there's something that I'm missing that I need. And that, we would say it's there's a Christ shaped hole in your heart, right? But that just means that humanity is longing for something it doesn't have. Well, what is it that it doesn't have? What it doesn't have is the Spirit of God, union with the divine. And this is um like when we see 1 Corinthians 6:17, you have become one with him in spirit, right? Like you are one spirit with him. What that means, right? That's the hypostatic union, is you have become one with his spirit. And it's no longer well, I'm just a human struggling with human things. I'm actually become one with him. So So in the incarnation, he takes our humanity. Our humanity doesn't make him less God. Our humanity becomes more like him. He elevates our humanity. Um, uh, so let's see. Let me just read you this. Uh, the divinity had vast ramifications to the human nature he assumed. The incarnation is vitally important to our salvation, not simply because Christ walked as a man and knew no sin, but because Christ walked as a man perfectly united to the divine Godhead. His coming was not just to cleanse sin, but to elevate humanity. In his birth, humankind receives the nature of God. In his ascension, we make our way to the Father. And this is when we see this narrative in Scripture, like when a good place to look is Ephesians 4, which has been classically taught as the fivefold ministry chapter in charismatic circles. Um, but the purpose of Ephesians 4, it says that Ephesians 4, I'm just going to turn to it in my Bible and look at it really quick with you. And then I've got a couple other things to say as well. In Ephesians 4, bear with me as I get there. It is right here. It says, to each one of us grace was given. This is verse 4, Ephesians 4, verse 7. To each one of us grace was given according to the measure of Christ's gift. And going on to verse 8. Therefore, he says, when he ascended on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts to men. And then verse 9. Now this he ascended, right? He went up. What does it mean but that he also first descended into the lower parts of the earth? He who descended is also the one who ascended far above all the heavens that he might fill all things. So first off, Paul is trying to show you that this quote from Psalm 68:18, which is when he ascended on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts to men. That this quote is directly referring to Jesus, because if he ascended, it means that he also had to descend before he ascended. And so that's Paul's point, is proving that this verse is a Christological prophecy. So he ascended on high, he led captivity captive, and he gave gifts to men. So he's also the one who descended, meaning that this is speaking about the nature of Jesus. So he led captivity captive. One, let's just look at that. He led captivity captive. What was the captivity that he led into captive? The captivity were those human prisoners that he now made slaves of righteousness, right? That he now captivated to himself. So the important thing is, when Christ ascended as a human, they watched a human being ascend, right? Back on high. He led humanity with him. He ascended as a human so that humanity in him ascends. So leading captivity captive is saying our humanity that was captive to carnal lusts, to the pleasures of the world, to the devil, to the world, the devil, and the flesh, the world, and the devil. We were captive to that. Now he has captivated us, and we've ascended with him, thus elevating humanity, because he's brought in his human form. He's taken the humanity and he's brought it, and it's seated right next to the Father. So humanity's ascended with him. That's one. And then it says, and he gave gifts to men. And then Paul, of course, says the gifts are apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers. So, but if we look at, this is an interesting one, and you can find, again, early church patristic theology. If you look at Psalm 68:18, if we turn back there, I'll read it for you so you can follow along with us. The quoted passage it says this, Psalm 68:18, which is what Paul's quoting in Ephesians 4. It says, you have ascended on high, you have led captivity captive. There we go. It's exact same phraseology, right? You've ascended on high, you've led captivity captive. And it says this, you have received gifts among men. Okay. So Paul changes it a little bit. I guess as an apostle, you can change the verb tense of Scripture. So in Psalm 68:18, it says, you ascended, you led captivity captive. That's what Paul says in Ephesians 4. But then in Psalm 68:18, it says, you received gifts among men. And in Ephesians 4, Paul says, you gave gifts to men. So which one is it? Is Paul misquoting it? Why does Paul say that? And the early church fathers, in particular Tertullian, posited that what Paul was saying is that as a human, he received gifts. So Psalm 68:18 is talking in the future tense. It's talking about what's going to happen. As a human, he received. And we see this in scripture. It talks about a number of things that Christ received as a human. And in Ephesians 4, it's talking about he gave, because Paul's looking back at what happened. So the idea is that what Christ received, because he's fully God, he has no need of anything. And this is what's important to understand, that he is fully God. He has no need of anything. As fully God, he doesn't need anything. So what he receives, he can't receive it because he needs it. So the Spirit comes at the baptism, right? Rests upon him. Well, he couldn't have had need of that because he's fully God. If he had need of that, it would make him less than God. So this is why it's important that we understand Christologically, Christ was always fully God. There's not a point where he was diminished in his godness. So the Spirit comes to him. Well, why did the Spirit come to him? Did he need the Spirit? No, he didn't. Well, why did he get it? Why did that happen? Because the Spirit comes, and then, according to Luke, he's led by the Spirit into the wilderness. So why is that the case? The scriptures talk about in Hebrews, it talks about how he's been given the name above every other name. Well, did he not have it before? Because he's God. So why would he need to receive that? And these are all the things that people would have threw out in the early church age, that, well, he can't have been fully God. He has to have just been some lower rank of divine being, because he received a name that he didn't have before. This is the patristics would go, well, he's fully God, so he didn't need it. So we'll explain that in a second. Why did he receive it if he didn't need it? He was given the oil of gladness beyond that of his companions. That's another one that Hebrews says. Why did he receive the oil of gladness? Was it like he was dour and unhappy before, and he needed to be glad, so God gave him the oil of gladness? Why? Why would he receive it if he didn't need it? He received the keys to the kingdom. He talks about they've been given the keys to the kingdom. Why would he receive the keys of the kingdom? Like, if he's God, did he not have them? Like, why would he need them? So why did he receive what he received? Or we can work backwards. First John, we talked about this already, says that we've received the seed from God that we might not continue to live in sin. And so, well, that means we can look back at Jesus. He received the seed of his Father in the womb of Mary's. He received it. So why did he receive that? Did he not have the nature of the Father? So what he received, we have to take into context and wrestle with the fact that as fully God, he wouldn't need it. So Tertullian says, and this is what guys like Leo were building on, is that in Psalm 68:18, it says he received gifts. In Ephesians 4, it says he gave gifts, because everything he received on behalf of humanity as a human, because everything it talks about him receiving, it talks specifically about his human vocation. This is also obedience. We talked about that. He learned obedience. He obtained obedience through his suffering. So everything he received in his human ministry, he received so that humanity would receive it. And this is the redemption element. Everything he received as a human, he received as a human on behalf of humanity, that when he led humanity captive back to the right hand of the Father, they would receive everything that was his to give. What he received so that he could give to you. So the incarnation is about elevating humanity. It's not about diminishing divinity. And that's something that we have to hold in context. So his godness was not diminished. His that all of humanity was elevated in him, because by faith now we're in him. It says that we are in him and he's in us. Like, this is why he invites us to abide in him and he'll abide in us, so that what he received we would receive, that we would fulfill the ultimate completion of the project that is fulfilled in Jesus, and that we would inaugurate his new kingdom age. So he takes the promises of the age to come, which we see in Revelation 21 and 22. No more tears, no more heartache, no more pain. What does Jesus go around doing? Healing and restoring and bringing justice. So he takes the promises of the age to come and pulls them into the present, and then unites humanity to him, so that through us, the promises of the age to come would be realized in the present, because we're the present fulfillment of a future promise. We are the present fulfillment of the project that he inaugurated in Genesis 1, finished in the person of Jesus, and is now working its way out into the world through the church and through every person united with the Spirit. So again, deep thoughts about the incarnation, but we have to come to grips with that this is one of the incarnation is one of the significant facets to accomplishing the kingdom vision of Jesus and uniting humanity again with divinity. So those are some thoughts for you, and we're diving into patristic theology. Tomorrow is Saturday, so we'll take Saturday and Sunday off for this, and then we'll pick up again on Monday. And we're going back to Leo the Great, talking about how equality with the Father does not forgo the nature of humanity. So just working these things out. How do we talk about them, and how do we understand them? And I'm firmly convinced that as we dig into these deep, rich, that the ancient texts, the understanding that we can bring into the present, that it will deepen our appreciation for the nature of Jesus, and the day of Christmas, where we celebrate the actual de facto incarnation. That on the day of Christmas, think about it. On the day of Christmas, humanity finally met what it had been longing for: divinity. What had been created for, the project, the culmination of the project, was finalized on Christmas Day, and that has ramifications to how you live your life. You have been united with him. Lorraine, yeah, lots of things to think about and consider. I've been so stunned in reading the early church fathers when it comes to their appreciation for the nature of Jesus. And so, yeah, I absolutely agree that there's lots to consider when it comes to that. We have a few resources that we've just released. I'd invite you to take a look at. You'll see in the description of the video is the new Wisdom from the Patristics course. And so that's taking a look at how the early church fathers made space and room for revelatory ministry, how they thought about the infilling of the Spirit, the practice of the spiritual gifts, and the outflow of that within the context of early church gatherings, and then the miraculous things that they saw happening around them. So it's diving into the first really 500 years of church history and saying, how did they practice these things, and how might we maybe be able to uh, um, how might that inform our practices today? So there's a link there in the description of the video to check out the Wisdom from the Patristics course. And so anybody that's interested in diving into the theology of the early church, and you've been thinking, man, I want to know more about what these guys said. Well, that's a really good place to launch off of. And then we've also just released our new Silent Fire devotional collection. And so these are taking the 10 devotionals that I wrote about, that inspired by the lives of the Desert Fathers and the Desert Mothers, putting them all into one nice big collection. And so you can find that on Amazon, and it'll ship anywhere you possibly would want. I actually just got a text from a friend yesterday, and he showed me his copy had arrived in the mail, and so that was super exciting to be able to see. It was the first picture I got of someone saying, "Look, I got the book in the mail." So that was awesome. I was really blessed by that, and a friend that's been watching these live streams too. So you can order that on Amazon if you're local to Summerside, PEI, or the Maritimes. We will have those in stock relatively soon. I just got a shipping notification that some of the books are on their way. So we'll see how long that takes. But our goal is to have those available just before Christmas for anybody that's local to hear. I know a few of you have asked me, well, if I'm around your area, can I pick it up? So yes, we will have that soon. So take a look at that. The links are for both of those are in the video description. As always, we appreciate any support that you offer, whether it's purchasing a book, whether it's saying a prayer, or whether it's donating to us. It enables us to continue to do the work that we're called to do. And we've got lots of stuff planned for next year. And I'm very excited about that. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and love you all, and have a deep affection and appreciation for each one of you. And just love that we're able to get to know each other digitally, and some of you I get to spend time with face to face, and that's wonderful. So until next time, I will see you on Monday, where we continue to dive into the journey through contemplative journey through patristic theology. So thanks.